Tonight, instead of watching history from a distance, you are going to live inside it. Not as a king, a knight, or a hero, but as one of the countless ordinary people whose names were never written down, yet whose days and nights kept the world quietly turning. In this long, slow journey, you will wake on a crackling bed of straw, feel the chill of dawn seep through wattle and daub walls, and share a smoky, crowded room with family, embers, and the soft rustle of tired clothes. You will step out into muddy village lanes, sidestep gutters and pigs, and learn how people like you moved carefully through a world that did not waste comfort on them. Across these 40 parts, you will follow one simple life through an entire day, from first grey light to the quiet weight of night, moving from hearth to lane, from pottage pot to fields, from small chores to small moments of rest. Nothing here is grand, yet everything matters. The crust of bread that fills a stomach, the thin cloak that almost keeps out the wind, the shared jokes that make hard work feel a little lighter. This is a story meant to be listened to slowly, perhaps with your own room dim and quiet, as you let another time settle around you like a blanket. If sleep comes while you are still in the village lane or by the morning hearth, that is perfectly all right. This world will continue without you, just as it always has. So when you are ready, close your eyes, let the noise of your own day fall away, and take a breath. Tonight you find yourself waking in a world that you may recognize from films and stories, but it feels very different when you are the one lying on the straw. You are an ordinary medieval commoner, somewhere in Western Europe, in a village clustered along a muddy track, surrounded by strips of fields that decide whether you and your neighbors eat well or go hungry. Your bed is a sack filled with straw laid over rough wooden boards, shared with family members, and a determined community of fleas and lice that treat you as their personal landscape. The straw rustles and scratches your skin each time you turn, leaving faint lines along your arms and legs. This is not a temporary inconvenience. It is simply what sleep means in your time. The house around you is one room, its walls made of wattle and daub, thin wooden rods woven together, then packed with a mixture of clay, sand, straw, and whatever else can be persuaded to stick. Small cracks have opened in the surface, letting in narrow blades of grey dawn light and equally narrow draughts of cold air. The roof above is thatch, thick bundles of reed or straw tied and layered so that rain usually stays out if it falls at the right angle. Years of smoke from the hearth have darkened the rafters, and a faint haze still hangs beneath them, because there is no proper chimney in this humble home. Smoke simply finds its own slow, wandering path toward a hole in the roof. The air smells of old smoke, damp woolen clothing, sweat, and the sour bite of the chamber pot in the corner, which waits for someone willing to trade warmth for the shock of cold, fresh air. Outside, rain falls softly on the thatch, and far beyond the fields, distant thunder rolls in a low, sleepy murmur that seems in no particular hurry to arrive. You get up not because the bed invites you to stay, but because the day has started to make quiet demands. In a house like yours, there is no question of sleeping in. Daylight is a resource, and you use every bit of it. Someone is already crouched by the hearth, raking aside grey ash to uncover the faint, glowing embers that managed to survive the night. If they had gone out completely, starting a new fire would cost precious time and fuel. This small hearth is the heart of your home, providing heat, light, and the only place where food can be cooked. The smoke curls lazily into the room first, stinging your eyes and catching in your throat, before it eventually drifts upward toward the opening in the roof. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, hardened by years of footsteps. It is uneven here and there, sprinkled with straw, crumbs of yesterday's bread, bits of ash, and the odd chicken dropping if your animals sometimes wander inside. In one corner stands a rough wooden chest or simple shelves if your family is fortunate, holding almost everything you own. A pot or two, a wooden bowl, a knife, some tools, and your few garments, carefully folded to make them feel more plentiful than they are. Your everyday clothing is simple and practical. Perhaps a linen or hemp shirt next to your skin if your household can afford it, a coarse wool tunic over that, hose or simple trousers for your legs, and a belt of rope or leather to keep it all together. These garments are not washed often. Water must be carried from a well, stream, or communal source, and soap, when available, is crude and precious. You do not have many clothes to rotate, so everything smells mildly of smoke, sweat, and the outdoors, but so does everyone else, which makes it easier not to notice. When you finally step outside, the morning greets you first through your feet. The village lane is narrow and muddy, churned into a thick, clinging paste by cartwheels, hooves, and bare or poorly shod feet. In the center of the track runs an open gutter, a shallow channel carved by use and rain, where water, kitchen scraps, and less pleasant household waste drift together on their slow journey toward a ditch or stream. Overhead, a wooden shutter creaks open, and a neighbor empties a chamber pot or slop bucket into the gutter with the relaxed accuracy of long practice. On considerate days, there might be a warning shout before the splash. On other days, you simply learn to choose your path carefully and accept that from time to time, your luck will be less than ideal. Proper toilets, with stone or wooden seats built over shafts leading to cesspits or running water. For people like you, there are simple pits at the edge of the settlement, rough wooden privies shared by several families, or the ever-faithful chamber pot emptied into a cesspit, ditch, field, or nearby river at the start of the day. Toilet paper is unknown. A handful of straw, moss, leaves, or worn-out cloth must do the job as best it can. It is not graceful, but it is entirely ordinary, and you have never expected anything else. Somewhere nearby, a pig snuffles happily in the mud, delighted by the very things you carefully try to avoid stepping in. As the fire strengthens and the light outside slowly brightens, your thoughts turn to the morning's food, although breakfast in your world is more a practical necessity than a celebrated meal. On many days, you begin with something simple and familiar. A piece of coarse, dark bread made from rye, barley, or a mix called maslin, perhaps, dipped in a bit of last night's pottage, if any remains clinging to the pot. The crust is hard enough that you sometimes soften it in liquid before biting, and the bread is heavy in your hand, but it fills the stomach and gives you energy for the fields. Pottage itself is less a single recipe and more a constant work in progress. A thin stew that changes with the seasons and with whatever you can spare. Into the cauldron go peas or beans, perhaps some barley or oats, and whatever vegetables are available. Leeks, onions, cabbage, turnips, or parsnips when the garden is kind to you. Meat is more of an occasional visitor than a regular resident in your bowl. A scrap of bacon, a bone with a little flavor left on it, or a bit of salted pork might find its way into the pot on good days or after a feast. The cauldron often hangs over the fire for hours, with ingredients added and removed as the day goes on, so that the pottage you eat this morning may be a distant cousin of the one you tasted yesterday. To drink, you may have a weak ale brewed at home, low in alcohol but safer than some sources of water, or you might trust the village well or nearby stream if it is known to be reasonably clean. Historians still debate exactly how cautious ordinary people were about water quality, but it is clear that in many places both water and ale are part of everyday life, chosen according to habit, taste, and whatever the local conditions allow. Your meals do not just follow your hunger, they also follow the rhythm of the church's calendar, which quietly organizes much of your life whether you are especially devout or not. On many days you may eat roughly the same bread, pottage, and occasional scraps of meat, but the year is dotted with fasts and feasts that change what is allowed to appear in your bowl. Fridays are commonly fasting days, and seasons like Lent and Advent bring longer periods when the church expects people to avoid meat from warm-blooded animals. In stricter times and places, eggs and dairy may also be off the table. This does not mean that peasants like you always follow every rule perfectly. Survival has a way of complicating obedience, but the expectations shape habits. And fish, peas, and beans take on extra importance when meat is forbidden or unaffordable. On good feast days, however, the village can transform. A successful harvest, a saint's day, or Christmas might bring better bread made from finer flour, a piece of pork or beef, perhaps some ale in larger quantities, and a rare sense that the table is briefly generous rather than just adequate. In lean years, when harvests fail or prices rise sharply, even your usual pottage becomes thinner, and people stretch food with whatever they can gather from hedgerows, forests, and fields. Acorns leached of bitterness, tough roots, wild greens, and anything else that might keep hunger from becoming too sharp. Historians note that the peasant diet could be surprisingly nutritious in good times, full of grains, vegetables, and pulses, but it also sat uncomfortably close to the edge of scarcity, so that a bad season or two could turn your daily bread from a routine comfort into a constant worry. Once you have eaten enough to quiet the first edge of hunger, the real shape of your day returns. Work, and then more work, arranged around the seasons and the demands of land you do not own. If you are a serf or villein, you hold strips of land from a lord in exchange for labor and dues, which means your time is divided between your own survival. On some days you walk out to your scattered strips in the open fields, long, narrow rectangles that sit beside those of your neighbors, and you dig, sow, weed, or harvest according to the time of year, using tools that are simple but tried and tested: wooden-handled hoes, scythes, sickles, and heavy plows pulled by teams of oxen. On other days, you are required to report to the Lord's domain, the land he keeps for himself, where you and other peasants work together under his officials' watchful eyes. This labyrinth might mean several days each week spent plowing, reaping, repairing fences, cutting wood, or performing whatever tasks are demanded. Women's work is no lighter. They may join in planting, weeding, or harvesting, especially at busy times, while also bearing the main responsibility for cooking, spinning, weaving, brewing ale, washing clothing in cold streams, and caring for children, the sick, and small animals close to home. Historians point out that in many rural communities, men and women shared more kinds of work than later stereotypes suggest, with the heaviest plowing usually reserved for men, but almost everything else up for negotiation depending on weather, need, and who still has the energy to stand. Your formal working hours follow the sun rather than a clock, longer in summer, shorter in winter, with intense bursts during plowing and harvest time when everyone, even children old enough to carry or glean, is expected to help. There are, it is true, church feast days and holidays scattered through the year that offer breaks from fieldwork, but when you are bent over the soil, even when the weather is kind and the harvest looks promising, there is a low background hum of danger that never quite leaves your life. Illness can arrive without warning and without explanation. A fever, a cough that will not fade, a wound that refuses to heal. Any of these can quietly move from nuisance to threat in a world without modern medicine or a clear understanding of germs. Children are especially vulnerable, and you have seen enough small graves in the churchyard to know that not every family gets to watch all its children grow up. Sudden outbreaks of disease can cut through a community with terrifying speed. Later generations will call some of these events plague or typhoid or dysentery, but in your time they are often explained as God's anger, bad air, or simply misfortune. Violence is another presence, usually kept just distant enough that you can pretend not to think about it during ordinary days. Disputes over land, insults, or theft can flare into fights, and serious crimes are met with punishments designed as much to frighten everyone else as to correct the offender. Local courts run in the name of your lord or the king may order fines, time in the stocks, whipping, mutilation, or hanging depending on what has been done and who has been offended. For minor offences, public humiliation in the stocks or pillory lets the community watch and sometimes jeer, a form of entertainment that doubles as a warning. For major crimes, especially against property or authority, death by hanging is a common solution, and tales of executions travel quickly, becoming part of the shared mental furniture of your world. To you, all of this feels harsh but unsurprising. It is simply how order is kept when there is no professional police force, and when people believe that fear of punishment now and of judgment later helps keep a fragile peace. The church reinforces that message, reminding you that even if earthly justice fails, there is always the possibility of Eta. Religion runs quietly underneath almost everything you do, like a low note you can always hear if you stop long enough to listen. Your village has a parish church, perhaps small and plain on the outside, but to you it is the most solid, impressive building in your world, built of stone while you live in timber and mud. You attend Mass regularly, not only out of belief, but because everyone is expected to be there. Baptism, marriage, and burial all pass through the hands of the church. so your life story is woven into its records whether you can read them or not. The service is in Latin, a language you do not understand, but you follow the rhythm of standing, kneeling, and responding when the rest of the congregation does. Paintings, statues, stained glass, and wall paintings act as your picture book, showing saints, angels, devils, and scenes from Scripture in vivid color. You are taught that your soul depends on living rightly, confessing sins, and supporting the church. And the idea of hell is described in such terrifying detail that even if you are not entirely sure what you believe about everything, you are very sure you do not want to find out what eternal punishment feels like. Each year you owe a tithe, traditionally a tenth of what you produce, to support the church and its clergy, offered in grain, animals, or other goods. The burden can feel heavy, especially in poor years, but you are warned that failing to pay risks not only local trouble but also your standing before God, which is a kind of pressure that reaches deeper than any lord's demand. For all its rules and warnings, the church also gives structure to joy. The year is studded with feast days and festivals that mark sowing, harvest, and the great moments of the Christian story. And on those days, your village briefly remembers how to celebrate. At Christmas, Easter, and important saints' days, work in the fields may pause, bells ring more often, and the church fills with candles, music, and the smell of incense. After the services, there may be communal meals, extra ale, and simple entertainments, with people talking a little louder and laughing a little more freely than usual. Fairs associated with holy days bring traders, minstrels, jugglers, and storytellers, turning the village or nearby town into something almost dazzling compared with your usual routine. For a brief time you can buy small luxuries, watch performers, and hear news from places you will never see. These occasions do not erase the hard edges of your life, but they soften them, reminding you that even within a strict system of work, tithes, and obedience, there is still room, though not as much as you might like, for singing, dancing, and the simple pleasure of not being in the fields for a day. When sickness does come close, your options for help are a patchwork of belief, tradition, and whatever local expertise can be found. Most people in your position will never see a university-trained physician. Those men, when they exist at all nearby, serve nobles, wealthy townsfolk, or monastic communities. Instead, you might turn first to a wise woman or healer in your village, someone known for her knowledge of herbs, poultices, and practical remedies learned from experience and passed down through families. She may brew infusions from plants like chamomile, sage, or yarrow, apply soothing salves to inflamed skin, or suggest garlic, honey, and vinegar for wounds and throat infections. Treatments that sometimes help and sometimes only provide comfort. A priest might also be called to offer prayers, blessings, or relics of saints thought to have healing power, because illness is often seen as a test, a punishment, or an opportunity for spiritual renewal. For broken bones, bad teeth, or bloodletting, there is the barber surgeon, if one is available, a practical craftsman who cuts hair, pulls teeth, lances, boils, sets fractures, and opens veins according to humoral theory, hoping to rebalance the body's internal fluids. Charms and amulets, bits of scripture written on parchment, and whispered prayers may accompany these treatments, blending medicine and magic so closely that it is hard for you to say where one ends and the other begins. Some of these remedies have real, if limited, effectiveness. Others offer mainly reassurance and the feeling that something is being done. In a world where explanations are uncertain and outcomes unpredictable, that feeling is often as valuable as the medicine itself. As evening comes on, the village slowly folds itself back into the safety of doors and shutters. Without modern streetlights, darkness is not just an absence of light. It is a presence of its own, full of possibilities you would rather not meet. You finish the last tasks of the day while there is still enough light to see, bringing animals into pens or even into the house, checking the fire, sweeping the worst of the dirt toward the door. Candles made from beeswax are beautiful, clean-burning luxuries reserved for churches and the wealthy. In your home, if there is any artificial light at all, it is more likely to be a smoky tallow candle or a rushlight, a dried rush plant dipped in animal fat and set to burn slowly with a wavering, unreliable flame. Many nights you simply let the fires glow and the faint light from the hearth guide you, because fuel is precious and every extra hour of light costs time, labor, or money. Outside, the paths between houses become uncertain, full of ruts you cannot see and shapes that might be a neighbor, a stray animal, or a stranger you would rather not meet. Wolves are a fear in some regions, but thieves and ordinary accidents are usually more dangerous than any monster. Stories of spirits, corpse lights in marshes, and wandering souls circulate freely, and whether you fully believe them or not, you behave as if they might be true, because cautious people are less likely to end up in ditches or worse. When it is finally time to sleep, you return to that same straw mattress that greeted you in the morning, now warmed by the day's fire and the presence of other bodies. Privacy, in the modern sense, is not really part of your life. Families commonly share beds with parents, children, and sometimes other relatives or guests, all sleeping side by side under the same rough blankets or woolen coverings. The mattress is stuffed with straw or hay, which flattens and shifts over time, so it needs to be restuffed periodically, an event that leaves the bed briefly fragrant and then quickly returns it to its usual slightly dusty state. Fleas and lice are familiar companions, annoying but hard to escape in a world where almost everyone lives close to animals and to each other. To keep out the cold, you might sleep in much of the clothing you wore during the day, huddled close with others, so that shared warmth becomes your main form of central heating. Some historians argue that people in pre-industrial Europe often slept in two phases: a first sleep soon after nightfall, and a second sleep after a quiet waking period in the middle of the night, though how universal this pattern was is still debated. In that calm interval between sleeps you might stir the fire, say prayers, talk softly, or simply lie awake listening to the rain on the roof and the breathing of those around you before drifting back down into the dark. The point in your night when the story turns from mud and fleas to marble corridors and candlelit corridors can arrive very quietly, like a change in the wind. One moment you are drifting somewhere between sleep and waking in a one-room house of wattle and daub. The next you find yourself walking calmly and without effort through a much grander doorway. Where you step now is still Europe, but the century has shifted forward, the clothes have changed, and the language in the air has taken on the longer vowels of the Russian court. You are following the life of a girl who begins, like you, as someone small and relatively unimportant, at least on paper. Her name at birth is Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst, often shortened in English to Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess born in 1729 in the Prussian city of Stettin, now Szczecin in modern Poland. Her father is Christian August, Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, a soldier and minor ruler with more titles than money, and her mother, Johanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp, is better connected socially than financially, which is often how these things go. Sophie grows up in a household that is noble but far from fabulously wealthy, where expectation and ambition are richer than the family accounts, and where a clever daughter is quietly understood to be one of the best assets available. As you walk alongside Sophie, you notice that her childhood is shaped less by comfort than by constant training for a life that has not yet been promised to her. She learns French, the language of polite European courts, along with some history, religion, music, and the careful manners expected of a young noblewoman who might someday be presented as a suitable bride. Her mother is ambitious and not especially gentle, pushing her toward opportunities that might raise the family's standing, measuring each visit and each conversation for its potential value. In the 1740s, an unexpected possibility begins to form. In distant Russia, the Empress Elizabeth, who has seized the throne herself, is looking for a bride for her chosen heir, the young Grand Duke Peter, a boy who is both her nephew and a future emperor in need of a suitably well-born, politically convenient wife. Through dynastic connections, Holstein-Gottorp blood on both sides, and a network of relatives who seem to stretch across half the aristocratic families of Northern Europe, Sophie's name appears on the list of candidates. She is not, at this point, the obvious choice, but she is considered respectable, malleable, and potentially useful. qualities that often matter more at courts than personal happiness ever does. The journey that carries Sophie from her German homeland to the vast, snow-rimmed spaces of Russia begins when she is still in her mid-teens, old enough to understand ambition, but young enough to have very little say in how it is used. In 1744, she travels to St. Petersburg, a city of palaces and canals on the Baltic, invited by Empress Elizabeth as a prospective bride for the Grand Duke Peter, the chosen heir to the Russian throne. To belong at this court, Sophie must become someone new. She studies Russian intensely, practices Orthodox customs, and, after some hesitation and family resistance, formally converts from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine, daughter of Alexeyevna, in a carefully staged public ceremony. The conversion is both a spiritual and a political act, signaling her willingness to leave behind her German identity and embrace a Russian future, something that endears her to many at court and especially to the Empress, who values loyalty to Russia above all. On the 21st of August 1745, when Catherine is about 16 and Peter about 17, they are married in St. Petersburg in a ceremony full of gold, icons, and solemn promises that say much about duty and very little about affection. Living with Peter, you quickly sense, is not the reward that the glittering ceremony might have suggested. Contemporary accounts and later historians agree that he is immature, erratic, and far more interested in Prussian uniforms, toy soldiers, and drinking than in his wife or the country he is supposed to rule one day. Catherine later writes in her memoirs that she found him childish and often cruel, a boy who never quite grew into his role, while she herself began to cultivate patience, self-control, and the art of appearing agreeable while thinking very hard behind her eyes. The marriage remains unconsummated for years, giving rise to gossip at court and uneasy questions about heirs, and Catherine learns to endure emotional neglect, sudden rages, and public humiliations as part of her daily environment. Empress Elizabeth, who adores the idea of grandchildren but disapproves of almost everyone's behavior, alternates between favor and sharp criticism, keeping Catherine close yet never entirely safe. In this watchful, gossipy world of courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, and foreign ambassadors, Catherine begins to build quiet alliances and to educate herself, reading history, philosophy, and political theory late into the night, while others are still busy with cards and scandals. Over time, Catherine's position at court becomes a balancing act that would exhaust almost anyone else. She must keep the Empress's favor, avoid provoking Peter unnecessarily, maintain good relations with powerful nobles, and watch diplomats from countries like France, Prussia, and Austria weigh her every gesture for signs of political leaning. At the same time, there is the personal question everyone in Russia seems to be asking: will she produce an heir? In 1754, she gives birth to a son, the future Paul I, but there is debate among historians about the exact nature of his parentage and about how affectionate either parent truly is toward him. Empress Elizabeth promptly takes the baby away to raise in her own quarters, a common practice in royal circles, but a painful one for Catherine, who is allowed only limited contact with her child and must watch from a distance as others make decisions about his upbringing. In the years that follow, Catherine has other relationships, most notably with men such as Sergei Saltykov and later Grigory Orlov, but serious biographers distinguish carefully between confirmed facts and the more extravagant legends that later centuries attach to her name. What is clear is that Catherine learns to navigate love, loyalty, and survival in a court where emotional life and political life are tightly intertwined, and where every private choice can have public consequences. When Empress Elizabeth dies in late 1761, the careful balance that has sustained Catherine's life abruptly changes. Peter, now Peter III, becomes Emperor of Russia, and you can almost feel the mood in the palace tilt as courtiers look for signs of what kind of reign is beginning. His policies, though sometimes reform-minded on paper, quickly alarm many powerful groups. He ends Russia's war with Prussia and makes peace on terms that seem overly friendly to Frederick the Great, angering officers who have just spent years fighting that very enemy. He is reported to have considered secularizing church lands and interfering with the privileges of the Orthodox clergy, worrying religious leaders, and he is careless in his treatment of the elite guards regiments, the very soldiers whose loyalty has often decided who sits on the Russian throne. At the same time, his personal behavior, mocking Russian customs, favoring German advisors, and publicly belittling Catherine, alienates many who might otherwise have supported him. Catherine, watching all this with the patient attention she has been perfecting for years, begins to understand that her own survival, and perhaps Russia's stability, may depend on whether she can step forward at exactly the right moment and in exactly the right way. The moment comes in the summer of 1762, and when it arrives, it moves quickly. With the support of influential nobles, key officers in the elite guards regiments, and her lover Grigory Orlov and his brothers, Catherine participates in a palace coup that removes Peter III from power after barely 6 months on the throne. On the 28th of June, 1762, she is proclaimed Empress of Russia as Catherine II, with soldiers swearing loyalty to her in St. Petersburg, while Peter, taken by surprise and lacking strong support, finds himself with very few options. Realizing that resistance will likely fail, he signs a formal abdication and is placed under guard at a country estate. Only days later, on the 17th of July, 1762, he dies under circumstances that remain murky even now. Officially, the cause is reported as a sudden illness, hemorrhoidal colic, and a stroke, but many contemporaries believe he was killed, possibly during a drunken quarrel with his captors, among them Alexei Orlov, one of Catherine's key allies. Historians generally agree that Catherine benefited from his death, and that it was carried out by men loyal to her. But there is still debate about how much she knew in advance, or whether she explicitly ordered the killing. Whatever the precise details, the effect is clear. Russia now has a new ruler, an empress who reached the throne through nerve, calculation, and a very modern understanding that power often belongs to the person who can persuade soldiers which side to stand on. From the moment she becomes empress, Catherine understands that she must present herself not as a mere usurper, but as a ruler with ideas, principles, and a genuine concern for the vast empire she now governs. She draws heavily on Enlightenment thinkers, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and others, corresponding with some of them directly, and weaving their language about law, reason, and the social contract into her public image. In 1767, she issues her famous nakaz, instruction, a long document meant to guide a proposed law code which calls for equality of all men before the law, denounces torture, and suggests that laws should serve the welfare of the whole society, rather than just the preferences of the powerful. The nakaz borrows freely from Western European political theory and sometimes goes further in its rhetoric than Catherine is willing or able to go in practice. But it signals to Europe that Russia now has a monarch who speaks the language of enlightened absolutism. At home, she sponsors commissions to examine legal reforms, supports projects to improve education, including the founding of the Smolny Institute for Noble Girls, and encourages the growth of printing and the arts, hoping to polish Russia's reputation as a civilized modern power. Yet for all this enlightened language, she does not abolish serfdom, and in many regions the power of landlords over peasants actually tightens during her reign, a contradiction that will trouble her legacy long after the candles in her palaces have gone out. Catherine's reign is not only about words and salons, it is also, very decisively, about maps. Under her rule, the Russian Empire expands dramatically, pushing south toward the Black Sea and west into territories that had long been contested between great powers. Through a series of wars against the Ottoman Empire, Russia gains access to warm water ports and influence over the northern shores of the Black Sea, culminating in the formal annexation of Crimea in 1783, a move that strengthens Russia's naval position and echoes through later centuries of history and geopolitics. In the West, Catherine participates in the three partitions of Poland in 1772, 1793, and 1795, working alongside Prussia and Austria to divide up the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth until it disappears from the map altogether. These partitions bring millions of new subjects, Poles, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Jews, and others, under Russian rule, further complicating the already diverse fabric of her empire. At the same time, she encourages exploration and settlement eastward, continuing Russia's long push into Siberia and beyond. To admirers, these achievements mark her as a visionary strategist who turns Russia into a major European power. To critics, they reveal an ambitious ruler who speaks the language of enlightened ideas while practicing a very traditional form of imperial expansion. For many of the people at the bottom of her empire, however, life under Catherine is far from enlightened. Serfdom, the system that ties peasants to the land and places them under the control of noble landlords, not only survives her reign but in some ways becomes harsher, as nobles receive more formalized rights over their dependents in exchange for their loyalty to the crown. Tensions over this system erupt dramatically in the 1770s with Pugachev's rebellion, a massive uprising led by Yemelyan Pugachev, who claims to be the murdered Peter III and promises freedom from serfdom, lower taxes, and relief from the power of landlords. The revolt spreads across large areas along the Volga and in the Urals, drawing in Cossacks, peasants, and discontented groups who see in Pugachev a chance to overturn a world that has been weighing heavily on them. Catherine's government responds with military force. After fierce fighting, the rebellion is crushed, and Pugachev is executed publicly in Moscow in 1775 as a warning to others. Far from prompting the abolition of serfdom, the uprising convinces Catherine and many in the elite that the peasantry must be controlled even more strictly, leading to tighter legal bonds and increased authority for landlords, especially in newly acquired territories. It is one of the clearest examples of the gap between Catherine's enlightened writings and the hard, often fearful calculations that shape her policies when power seems threatened. In her later years, Catherine continues to write, plan, and correspond, even as age and politics gradually narrow the circle of what she can realistically change. She remains an enthusiastic patron of the arts and education, expanding collections that will form the basis of the Hermitage Museum and supporting theatres, academies, and architectural projects that transform parts of St. Petersburg into a showcase of imperial grandeur. Internationally, she watches the French Revolution unfold with growing alarm, seeing in its slogans about liberty and equality a direct threat to the carefully balanced structure of monarchy and nobility on which her own rule depends. Censorship tightens, and she becomes more conservative, especially toward ideas that might encourage unrest among her subjects. In November 1796, after a reign of 34 years, Catherine dies in St. Petersburg, likely from a stroke, leaving the throne to her son Paul I, with whom she had a strained and complicated relationship. Her reputation both then and now is a mixture of admiration and criticism. An enlightened despot who read Voltaire and wrote the Nakaz, a hard-headed ruler who expanded her empire by partitioning neighbors and tightening serfdom, a foreign-born princess who became in many Russians' eyes one of the defining figures of their history. Now, as the story grows quieter, you find yourself looking back over the paths you have walked tonight. You have stood in a one-room house of wattle and daub, feeling straw prickle your skin and smelling wood smoke and damp wool. You have stepped carefully along muddy lanes, dodging gutters that carried away more than just rainwater. You have eaten coarse bread and endlessly inventive pottage, and learned how hard people had to work simply to keep hunger at arm's length. You have watched peasants bend over fields they did not own, felt the weight of tithes, dues, and obligations, and sensed how illness, violence, and sudden misfortune always seemed closer to them than any comfort. You have also walked beside a minor German princess who became Catherine the Great, watching her learn new languages, survive a loveless marriage, navigate a dangerous court, and seize a crown in a moment of carefully chosen boldness. You have seen her read philosophers by candlelight, write confident instructions about justice and law, expand the borders of her empire, and struggle with contradictions she never fully resolved, between enlightenment and control, compassion and fear, lofty words, and the rough realities of power. All of these lives, high and low, have unfolded under the same sky whose clouds and stars you know so well, and they have all, in their own ways, done the same simple, difficult thing you are doing now. They have tried to make it through one more day and then one more night with whatever courage, humor, and tired kindness they could find. As you lie here listening to the soft rain and distant thunder, the details of those other lives can start to loosen and drift, like smoke rising from a hearth, the mud in the village lane, the scratch of straw, the heavy taste of rye bread, the rustle of silk in a palace corridor. All of it can fade into something gentler, no longer quite so sharp or demanding. It is enough now simply to know that people before you have lived through conditions far harsher and more uncertain than yours, often without understanding why things were as they were, and yet they still found ways to laugh, to love, to tell stories, and to close their eyes at the end of the day. The medieval commoner you walked beside woke each morning to work and worry, but also to the small comforts of familiar faces, shared meals, and the reassuring sight of smoke rising from neighbors' roofs. Catherine the Great, for all her power, still had to manage fear, loneliness, and doubt, turning pages of books and letters late at night in search of ideas that might make sense of the world she was trying to shape. You too carry your own mixture of burdens and hopes, but unlike them, you are listening from a place where the roof does not usually leak, where water arrives clean from a tap, and where the dangers of the dark are mostly quieted by locks, lights, and laws that previous centuries fought hard to build. If your thoughts begin to wander now, that is perfectly all right. They can drift back for a moment to the cool dimness of a parish church, where candles flicker before painted saints and a language you do not understand hums like distant bees. They can linger briefly in a Russian palace, where Catherine pauses at a window to look out over the Neva River, her mind turning over questions of law and empire, or they can simply float free of particular places and people, resting instead on the idea that history is made up of countless ordinary nights like this one, each filled with someone's quiet breathing, someone's small worries, someone's hope that tomorrow might be just a little easier than today. The peasants you met rarely had the chance to sit still and feel safe. Rain on the roof might mean a good harvest, but it might also mean flooding, illness, or spoiled grain. Catherine could command armies and sign decrees, but she could not control every rumor, every storm, every twist of fate in a vast and complicated empire. Yet both the poorest villagers and the most powerful empress eventually reached the same simple point at the end of each day. They lay down, listened to the sounds around them, and trusted that sleep would carry them gently away for a while. Tonight, with the world outside your window softened by darkness and rain, you are allowed to do the same. You do not need to remember every fact or follow every detail anymore. The dates, the names of dynasties, the exact borders of empires can all quietly loosen their grip and slide into the background, like books gently closing on a high shelf. What remains is the softer outline of what you have seen. That life in the past was often uncomfortable, uncertain, and brief, and yet people still managed to be stubbornly human in the middle of it all. They shared cramped beds, crowded around smoky fires, stood for long hours in cold churches, and walked under the same clouds that drift over you now. Some, like Catherine, occupied rooms lined with mirrors and gilt, full of advisors and petitions. Others had only rough wooden walls and the company of chickens, pigs, and neighbors who knew all their secrets. All of them, in their own times, worried about the future and thought of themselves as living in the complicated present. None of them knew how their stories would later be told, or how quietly their lives might help someone centuries away fall asleep. So you can let your breathing slow, as though you are back on that straw mattress listening to the embers of the hearth settle with soft clicks, while the village outside sinks into silence. You can imagine a last candle being pinched out in a Russian palace corridor, the flame narrowing to a point before disappearing, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the faint rustle of fabric as doors close for the night. The rain outside your own window becomes, if you like, the steady patter on thatch overhead, or the gentle drizzle on palace roofs and cobblestones, a sound that has comforted tired people for as long as anyone can remember. You do not have to hold the whole of history in your mind. It is enough to feel that you are part of its long, quiet thread, lying here with a roof over you, cleaner water, safer streets, and the luxury of listening to a story purely for rest. The hardships of those earlier centuries do not demand anything from you now. They have already been endured. All they offer you this evening is perspective. and a kind of soft permission to let go of today's concerns, knowing that compared with mud lanes, brutal winters, and uncertain rulers, you have already come a very long way. If your eyes grow heavy, you can allow them to close, trusting that the past will keep its own watch while you sleep. If stray thoughts still wander in and out, you can treat them the way a medieval villager might treat smoke from the hearth, something that curls and drifts, a little irritating if you stare straight at it, but harmless if you simply let it move past. The faces you have met tonight, anonymous peasants bent over their fields, a young Sophie studying French verbs, and Empress Catherine signing decrees with a firm, practiced hand, can grow softer around the edges now, turning from sharp portraits into faint sketches. You might picture a small, ordinary scene instead. A peasant child falling asleep against a parent's shoulder during a long church service. Or Catherine's hand resting for a moment on the windowsill as she watches snow falling over St. Petersburg, her thoughts drifting away from politics and toward nothing in particular. In those quiet, unrecorded moments, they are not symbols or lessons, they are just tired people letting their minds float, exactly as you are invited to do. The centuries between you and them shrink a little, and what remains is a simple, shared experience. There is nothing more you need to accomplish tonight. The fields of medieval Europe do not require your help. The peasants have already lived their lives, harvested their crops, and laid their tools down. Catherine the Great has already read her books, written her manifestos, faced her rebellions, and taken her last careful breath in 1796. Their tasks are finished, and so are yours for today. Outside your window, the world can continue doing whatever it likes. Cars passing, clocks ticking, weather shifting, while inside your room you let the air grow slower and softer around you. You might feel the weight of your body sink a little deeper into the bed, as if gravity itself has gentled, not pulling you down, just holding you in place. If a fragment of pottage, a flash of a muddy lane, or a glint of light on a Russian river crosses your mind again, you can let it pass through like a cloud across the moon. All that is asked of you now is to rest, to breathe, and to let these distant, finished stories fade into a comfortable blur until they are no longer separate tales at all, but just a quiet background hum as you drift further and further away. In a little while, even the idea of medieval peasants and Russian empresses may feel too precise to hold on to, and that is perfectly fine. You can let them dissolve into something simpler, the sense that many, many nights have come before this one, and countless people have already made the same quiet decision you are making now to surrender the day and trust that sleep will do its slow, invisible work. The straw mattress becomes only a bed, the thatched roof only a shelter, the palace only a room with a closed door, and all of those places blend gently into your own room with its familiar shapes and sounds. You are not in the 14th century or the 18th. You are here, in your own time, with all the accumulated safety, knowledge, and small comforts that earlier centuries never fully knew. You do not have to feel guilty for that. If anything, those past lives would probably be delighted that someone, somewhere in the future, finally gets to lie down without worrying too much about wolves, famine, or the sudden anger of a distant ruler. They have carried history this far. Tonight, you have permission to put it down. So, as the rain continues its soft conversation with the world outside, you can imagine drawing a curtain, not to shut the past out, but to dim it to a gentle glow. Behind that curtain, peasants are finishing their work, banking their fires, and curling up on their straw beds. Catherine is setting down her pen, closing a heavy book, and allowing the candles to burn low in their holders. Here, on your own bed, you can match their movements in the simplest way, shifting to find a comfortable position, letting your shoulders release, feeling each breath arrive and depart without needing to do anything about it. The story has reached a place where nothing more needs to happen. The lanes are quiet, the palaces are dark, the fields are resting under the sky. You are safe enough to close your eyes. If sleep has not quite arrived yet, you can wait for it the way people have always waited for the first light of dawn, not by forcing it, but by trusting that it will come in its own time. Some last small thoughts may still tap politely at the edge of your mind, little reminders of tomorrow, or echoes of today, but you do not have to invite them in for a long conversation. They can wait politely in the hallway of your attention while you slip further into the quiet room behind it, where nothing urgent is allowed to follow. If you like, you can picture one more gentle scene. The medieval village under a sky full of stars, its fires reduced to faint orange dots, or the roofs of St. Petersburg pale under a winter moon, with only a few late candles burning behind high windows. The people inside those houses and palaces have already chosen rest. They have stopped talking, stopped planning, and simply let their minds unfurl into dreams. You are walking in step with them now, at the very end of a long, quiet journey through their world, and there is nothing left to do but follow them into sleep. Soon, even this voice can fade to a distant murmur, like someone speaking in another room, while you lie comfortably half awake, half asleep. The rain, or whatever soft sound surrounds you, can take over as the main storyteller, repeating its simple, soothing pattern until words are no longer necessary at all. If you wake later in the night, as many people did in earlier centuries during their first and second sleeps, you will still be safe and you will still have time to drift off again. But for now, you can let your eyelids grow heavier with each breath, knowing that the mud, the palaces, the fields, the courts, and all their worries belong firmly to the past. This moment belongs only to you, to your body resting, to your thoughts loosening their grip, and to the long, gentle slide into sleep. If some small part of you is still listening, still half alert, it can simply notice how little is being asked of it now. No decisions, no judgments, no need to remember which century you visited or which monarch signed which decree. Only the soft rhythm of your own breathing and the distant, harmless sounds of the world continuing without you for a while. The medieval villagers, with their aching backs and calloused hands, would probably have envied the chance to lie so still without being jolted awake by cold, hunger, or the need to tend animals in the dark. Catherine, with her endless stream of petitions and reports, might have envied a night in which no messenger could knock on the door with news of war, rebellion, or diplomatic disaster. You are carrying none of their burdens. You are simply borrowing their stories as a gentle backdrop, a distant, harmless landscape over which your thoughts can wander until they finally forget to come back. So, if your mind begins to lose the thread of these sentences, that is not a failure. It is the whole point. Words can blur into one another the way raindrops blur on a window, forming softer shapes that no longer demand to be read closely. Somewhere beyond your awareness, history will go on being complicated, with new discoveries, new interpretations, and new arguments about what really happened and why. None of that needs your attention tonight. The only history that matters in this moment is the quiet record your body is writing as it settles, muscles lengthening, heartbeat slowing, breath deepening. You have come a long way through other people's days and nights. Now you have reached the very end of your own day, and there is nothing left to do but let yourself drift gently and completely into sleep. By now, the figures from earlier in the night may feel very far away, like actors who have stepped quietly off stage and closed the door behind them. The peasant standing ankle-deep in mud, the wise woman with her bundle of herbs, the guards who swore loyalty during a risky summer coup, and Catherine with her pen poised over a sheet of paper. All of them can rest where they belong, in their own centuries. They no longer need your attention, and you no longer need to follow their paths. The only thing that stays with you is a soft awareness that other people have carried much heavier loads through much darker nights, and that they still found ways to lie down and let sleep claim them for a while. Compared to them, you are cradled in a world that, for all its noise and trouble, gives you a safer bed, a quieter room, and far fewer real dangers in the dark. That safety is not something you have to earn moment by moment. It is simply there, holding you up as you let go. If sleep has not quite arrived yet, you can think of this as the gentle space between the first and second sleeps that many people before you once knew, a calm gap in the night when there is nothing urgent to do, and no one is keeping score of how fast you drift off. You can stay here as long as you like, floating just beneath full wakefulness, letting the story, the rain, and your own breathing weave together into a single slow rhythm. Thoughts may still cross your mind now and then, but they can pass as lightly as footsteps on a distant street, heard and then gone. The peasants have long since closed their shutters. Catherine's last candle has burned down. Even the chroniclers who wrote their histories have put down their quills. The night does not need you to do anything more. Whenever you are ready, whether in a few breaths or a few pages of drifting attention, you can allow yourself to slip fully into sleep, knowing that history, with all its mud and marble, will still be there tomorrow. But tonight belongs entirely to your rest.